The gallery felt too quiet for a night so warm, the kind of quiet that makes your heartbeat sound louder than it should. Malik stepped inside, telling himself he was only browsing, only killing time, but something in the air tightened around him like a warning wrapped in silk. The paintings were arranged in soft pools of golden light, each one calm, serene, except one. A portrait hanging alone near the back seemed to pull the room inward, as if the shadows bent around it. Malik tried to walk past, but his chest stirred, a strange ache that felt both familiar and unwanted. The eyes in the portrait glimmered with a sadness that mirrored a secret he never said aloud, a wound he kept tucked beneath his smile. He moved closer even as his mind whispered to stop, and the closer he came, the more the world thinned. By the time he reached it, he felt breathless, as if the painting had exhaled his name before he touched its frame. And in that moment he wondered, how can something you've never seen still feel like it remembers you? Malik carried the portrait home with a strange mix of excitement and unease, telling himself it was just the thrill of finding something rare. But the silence in his apartment felt different when he stepped inside, as though the room paused to take in what he held. He set the painting on the dining table, still wrapped, yet its presence pressed against his chest like a heartbeat that wasn't his. He tried to distract himself by unpacking, turning on music, even pouring a drink, but every sound felt distant, muted, as if swallowed by the energy that followed him from the gallery. When he finally unwrapped the painting, the air cooled around him, and the eyes staring back felt softer than before, almost relieved. He sat down slowly, unsure whether he was imagining that sense of recognition, that gentle tug beneath his ribs. And even as he whispered that he was tired, that he was overthinking, he couldn't shake the truth settling quietly inside him. Something in that portrait wanted him here. Malik told himself he was only checking the painting again, but his feet carried him back to it like habit, like instinct. He stood a few inches away, noticing details he hadn't seen earlier. Tiny ridges where the brush pressed harder, a faint warmth that shouldn't exist on dried paint. The longer he stared, the quieter the room seemed to become, as if the world was holding its breath. He reached out not to touch the canvas, but simply to feel the space around it, sensing a subtle charge in the air. Every part of him insisted this was impossible, yet he couldn't escape the feeling that someone was reaching back. A soft ache tightened in his chest, the same feeling he used to get in the moments before heartbreak, when silence revealed truths he ignored. He stepped back, shaken, whispering that he needed sleep. But even as he walked away, he felt eyes following him. Not demanding, not frightening, just waiting. Sleep never came easily. Malik lay awake staring at the ceiling, telling himself the uneasiness in his chest was just exhaustion. But each time he closed his eyes, he saw the portrait's gaze, steady, patient, almost human. The night felt heavier than usual, the air thick with a quiet that didn't belong. He sat up, rubbed his hands over his face, and tried to laugh at himself. But the sound came out strained. Something in the apartment felt occupied, not by danger, but by a presence too subtle to name. He walked to the living room, hoping that distance would help. But even in the darkness, he could feel exactly where the portrait was, as if it pulsed faintly through the walls. A soft whisper of wind brushed the balcony door, though it was closed, raising chills along his arms. He reminded himself he'd bought art, not emotion. Yet the truth settled deeper with every minute. This was no ordinary painting, and he was no longer a simple observer. By morning, Malik felt drained, as if he'd run miles in his sleep. The apartment looked the same, yet something inside him had shifted. He made coffee, hoping it would clear the fog in his mind, but the moment he turned toward the portrait, a strange calm washed over him. He approached it slowly, no longer afraid, more curious, like stepping toward a quiet truth instead of a threat. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, brushing soft streaks of gold across Sela's painted face. For a moment, he could almost imagine her blinking in the light. He shook off the thought and whispered that he needed answers, even if he didn't know who to ask. As he stared into those painted eyes, he felt a strange understanding settle within him. A promise he hadn't made yet somehow felt bound to. Something had already begun, and whether he wanted to or not, he knew he was part of it now. Malik couldn't escape the feeling that something was changing inside him. The more time he spent near the portrait, the more the world outside felt faint, muffled, like background noise he no longer belonged to. Every sound in his apartment seemed softer, every moment slower, as if the painting set its own rhythm and he unconsciously followed. He told himself he needed clarity, not fear. So he opened his laptop and searched the artist's name, hoping to find a simple explanation, a biography, an interview, anything. But all he found were scattered mentions of a reclusive painter who rarely appeared in public and whose work was rumored to hold emotional resonance beyond technique. The words unsettled him. A part of him wondered if he was losing his grip, but another part whispered that he wasn't imagining any of this. Something about that artist felt familiar, as if she had been waiting for him long before he ever found her work. Hours passed before Malik realized he was still staring at the same article, reading the same paragraph over and over without absorbing anything. His thoughts kept drifting back to the feeling he had when he first saw the painting, that strange recognition he couldn't explain. Finally, he grabbed his keys and decided to return to the gallery. Maybe someone there could tell him more about the artist. The walk outside felt surreal, the city buzzing with its usual noise, while he felt caught in a slower, quieter world. When he arrived, the gallery owner recognized him instantly and smiled. But the moment Malik asked about the painter, the man's expression shifted. He spoke carefully, describing her as talented but distant, someone who painted with painful intensity and rarely let anyone meet her. Malik listened, feeling a chill settle over him. The owner didn't know much, but he mentioned one thing. She always said her art found the people it needed, and never by accident. Malik stepped back into the street, feeling more uneasy than before. The air had cooled with the late evening breeze, but his chest felt warm and unsettled. Every block he walked brought him closer to a decision he didn't want to acknowledge. He needed to find the artist herself. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, a pull he couldn't break. He tried to reason with himself, telling his thoughts to slow down. But the closer he got to home, the stronger the feeling became. It was as if the painting sensed his distance and tugged gently at him, urging him to return. When he reached his apartment door, he hesitated. The silence behind it felt alive, expectant. And though he had left only an hour ago, something inside told him the painting would not feel the same when he walked back in. With a steady breath, he turned the key, unsure of what waited on the other side. The moment Malik stepped inside, the temperature felt different. Cooler, sharper, like the air had been stirred by something unseen. The portrait sat exactly where he left it, but the energy around it felt heavier. He moved closer, noting how the colors seemed richer than before, as if the paint had deepened in his absence. A soft pressure grew behind his eyes, not painful but insistent, making him blink slowly. He whispered, a quiet hello, though he didn't know why, and the room seemed to settle in response. His heartbeat slowed, matching a steady rhythm he couldn't trace. Kneeling beside the table, he studied the brushwork again, the tenderness in the painted expression, the grief hidden in the shadows. For a moment, he felt the loneliness behind the art as clearly as if it were his own. And in that stillness, he sensed it again. That pull, that echo, that quiet longing reaching toward him like an invisible hand. Malik didn't remember falling asleep, but he woke on the couch hours later with the lamp still on and the portrait watching quietly from across the room. His head felt heavy, filled with fragmented dreams of a woman standing in the dusk, her eyes carrying a sorrow he felt responsible for. He sat up slowly, steadying his breath as the pieces blurred together. Every instinct told him that this wasn't normal, yet he felt no fear, just a strange tenderness, as if the painting had protected him while he slept. The early morning light pressed softly through the blinds, brushing the portrait with a pale glow. Malik whispered that he didn't know what was happening, but he sensed he wasn't meant to walk away from, whether he chose it or not. Something had bound him to the artist through this creation, and the only path forward was to find her before the connection grew stronger than he could bear. Malik spent the morning searching for Sela's studio, following a trail of vague mentions and half-remembered interviews. Every step he took felt strangely guided, like something inside him already knew where she would be. The city felt different today, quieter, slower, as if it were making space for something to unfold. He walked through narrow streets painted with murals and old brick buildings, his heartbeat matching the steady rhythm of the moment. When he finally found the address, an old converted warehouse wrapped in climbing ivy, the air shifted again. He paused at the entrance, feeling an ache he couldn't explain. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It felt like stepping toward a truth he'd recognized long before he was ready to face it. He knocked softly, half hoping no one would answer, but also terrified that someone might. And beneath everything, that same invisible thread tugged gently, urging him forward like a promise he didn't understand yet. The door opened just enough to reveal a pair of watchful eyes before a soft voice told him to wait. Malik stood still, unsure what he expected but feeling the weight of every second. When the door finally opened fully, Sela stepped into the dim hallway, and for a moment, Malik forgot to breathe. She looked almost identical to the portrait, gentle, wounded, beautiful in a way that felt familiar. She studied him with quiet caution, as if she already knew why he had come. Malik tried to explain, stumbling over words about the painting and how it made him feel. But Sela didn't flinch or look surprised. Instead, she turned away slowly and told him to come inside. Her voice sounded like she carried stories she couldn't yet speak. Malik followed her, the door closing behind him with a soft echo that felt like the start of something he could no longer walk away from. The studio smelled of oil paint and something softer. Jasmine, maybe. Malik walked slowly, taking in the canvases leaning against the walls. Each one felt alive, filled with emotion so strong he could almost hear it. Sela watched him from behind, her silence steady but not cold. When she finally spoke, her voice held a trembling honesty. She told him she never painted from photographs, never from models, that her work came from feeling, not sight. Malik felt his breath catch as she studied him with a searching gaze. She said she had dreamed of a man with his presence for months before the portrait ever existed. Someone wrapped in quiet heartbreak. Malik looked away, unsettled by how easily she seemed to see through him. Still, he couldn't deny the strange sense of recognition pulsing beneath his ribs. As she stepped closer, the room seemed to shrink around them, the air thick with something unspoken yet undeniable. Sela led him toward a smaller hidden room at the back of the studio. The moment she opened the curtain, Malik felt an emotional weight slip over him like a blanket soaked in memory. Inside were dozens of sketches, faces he didn't recognize, all drawn with aching tenderness. But one sketch stood out, his face captured with heartbreaking accuracy long before they had ever met. Malik felt his chest tighten, his breath slowing as he stepped closer. Sela admitted she didn't understand it either, only that she felt compelled to paint him, as though his spirit had reached out to her before they even crossed paths. Malik stared at the sketch, trying to understand what connected them. He felt exposed and strangely understood all at once, like she had seen a version of him he had never shown anyone. A quiet dread and gentle wonder twisted together inside him, leaving him unsure whether to stay or run. Malik turned toward Sela, searching her face for answers she didn't have. She held his gaze with quiet vulnerability, as if she feared what the truth might cost them both. She said the dreams began during a lonely season of her life, dreams filled with a man whose sadness mirrored her own. She painted to release the feeling, never expecting the man to become real. Malik felt the weight of her words settle deeply, stirring something he'd kept buried for years. The silence between them stretched not awkward but heavy with meaning. He admitted he felt drawn to her work in ways he couldn't explain, as if something in it recognized him before he recognized himself. Sela stepped closer, not touching him yet, but close enough for their breaths to mingle. And in that fragile moment, Malik understood something terrifying and beautiful. Their connection wasn't new. It was only now becoming visible. Malik stayed in the studio longer than he meant to, drawn into the quiet gravity between him and Sela. But as the evening light softened, a subtle pressure built behind his ribs, the same strange pull had felt near the painting. Sela noticed before he said anything. Her expression tightened with worry, as if she sensed something changing in him. Malik tried to shake it off, telling himself it was only exhaustion, yet every breath felt heavier, slower. When he reached for the sketch of himself, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over him, forcing him to steady his hand on the table. Sela stepped closer, her eyes widening with a mix of fear and recognition. She whispered that she never meant for this to happen, but the way she said it made him realize she knew more than she had admitted. The room felt colder, the shadows deeper, and Malik wondered if he had stepped into something he couldn't undo. Sela guided Malik to a chair, her hands trembling slightly as she urged him to breathe slowly. She told him the connection he felt wasn't imagined. Her paintings carried pieces of her, fragments of emotion she couldn't hold alone. She confessed that she painted him during a moment of deep loneliness, pouring so much of herself into the portrait that it created a bond she hadn't understood until now. Malik listened, his heartbeat irregular, the room tilting softly around him. He wanted to blame her, to accuse her of pulling him into something he never asked for, but the fear in her eyes kept him silent. She said the connection wasn't supposed to take from him, that she never meant for her longing to reach across distance and touch someone real. Malik pressed his hand against his chest, feeling the weight of her words settle like a truth he could no longer ignore. Malik tried to stand, but the moment he did, a surge of weakness swept through him, forcing him to brace himself against the wall. His breath came slow and thick, as if something inside him was draining away. Sela pleaded for him to sit again, her voice cracking as she admitted the truth. Her art didn't just carry emotion, it consumed it. She'd always painted to fill the emptiness inside her, never realizing that the more she poured into her work, the more it took from anyone who connected deeply with it. Malik felt the fear rising in him, but beneath it was a strange softness, a pull that felt almost tender. He looked at Sela and saw her trembling, ashamed and terrified of hurting him. He wanted to step away, but the invisible thread pulling him toward her tightened, making it clear that their bond was no longer just emotional. It was something living, something neither of them fully controlled. Sela moved closer, afraid he would collapse, but also afraid of what her presence might be doing to him. Malik closed his eyes, trying to steady the world tilting around him. He felt an echo of emotion inside him that wasn't his: grief, longing, the weight of someone who had spent too many nights alone. It washed over him, so powerfully, he momentarily lost his sense of self. He whispered Sela's name, hoping it would ground him, and she froze, tears gathering quickly. She said she never wanted to take anything from him, that she only wanted to paint the feeling so she wouldn't carry it alone. Malik opened his eyes and saw her shaking, not from fear of him, but fear for him. The connection between them pulsed like a heartbeat, alive and unspoken. It hurt, but it also felt like truth, and Malik wondered whether breaking free from it would destroy them both. Malik finally managed to sit, breathing deeper, though the heaviness lingered in his chest. Sela sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly, as she tried to find the right words. She confessed that this wasn't the first time someone felt drained by her work, though never like this, never so quickly, never so intensely. She said she had always stopped herself from painting people she dreamed about because it made the feeling worse. But with him, she couldn't fight it. Malik felt a strange mix of fear and tenderness rise in him. He wanted to hate her for what was happening, yet all he saw was someone carrying guilt she never asked for. The silence between them grew heavy, not with distance, but with the weight of what they now shared. And as he held her gaze, he understood that this was the moment everything changed. They could no longer pretend this connection was anything less than powerful, dangerous, and deeply real. Malik tried to regain control of his breathing, but the growing heaviness in his chest made it difficult to steady himself. The bond between him and Sela pulsed like a slow wave, pulling at something deeper than emotion. Sela watched him with a sorrow so sharp it looked carved into her. She whispered that she could feel him weakening the moment he walked away from the portrait earlier, and Malik felt a chill slide through him. He didn't want to believe she was connected to him so intensely, but every moment proved it more. As Sela stepped closer, her voice trembled with guilt, telling him that she had spent years trying to understand why her art carried pieces of her spirit. Pieces that clung to those who felt deeply. Malik wanted to stand, to step back, to create space between them. But the ache in his ribs deepened the farther he tried to pull from her, and in that moment he realized with quiet fear that the connection wasn't breaking, it was tightening. The studio felt smaller with every passing second, walls closing in as if reacting to the weight between them. Sela paced slowly, wiping her palms on her paint-stained clothes, her breathing shaky as she confessed that she had once tried to destroy a portrait of someone she dreamed about. She said the moment she did, she felt a pain that left her bedridden for days. Malik felt a cold shiver travel his spine. The connection wasn't just emotional, it was physical, spiritual, something that defied anything he had ever known. She stopped pacing and turned toward him with a desperation that made his chest tighten. She told him she didn't know how to break the bond without hurting him, and that terrified her more than losing her own work. Malik rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed, torn between anger and an ache that felt like understanding. He wanted to run, but running no longer felt possible. The bond followed him everywhere. Malik rose slowly, his body unsteady, but his voice more certain than he expected. He told Sela that hiding the truth would only hurt them more, and she froze as if his words cracked something inside her. She turned away, gripping her own arms, whispering that she never meant to tie herself to anyone. Malik stepped closer, not because he wanted to, but because some invisible force guided him. When she finally looked at him, her eyes were filled with a fear he recognized. Fear of losing something she never meant to find. He reached out, lightly resting his hand on her arm, and for a moment the room felt still, as if the very air held its breath. A shock of warmth surged between them, neither painful nor gentle, just overwhelming. Sela exhaled shakily, admitting she didn't know how to undo what she had created. Malik whispered that maybe the answer wasn't to undo it, but to understand it. As the last of the daylight faded, Sela led Malik to the far side of the studio, where a canvas draped with cloth stood taller than the rest. She hesitated before uncovering it, her voice barely above a whisper, as she said this was the painting she never meant anyone to see. Malik felt his heart pound harder as she pulled the cloth away, revealing a massive portrait of a man standing at the edge of a dark field, the sky churning with clouds. The figure looked hauntingly close to him, similar posture, similar presence, as though she had painted a future she couldn't explain. Malik stepped closer, feeling a suffocating pressure in the air, like the painting itself breathed. Sela said she painted it during a dream too vivid to ignore. She admitted she had always known it meant something, but never understood what. Malik stared at the portrait, realizing that their connection had begun long before they ever met. It had started here. Malik stepped back from the massive portrait, overwhelmed by the threads tying everything together. Sela's dreams, the painting in his home, the unavoidable pull, none of it felt accidental anymore. Sela watched him with a fragile hope, as if she feared this moment would decide everything. Malik asked her whether she believed the painting had chosen him, and she nodded slowly, tears forming again. She said she felt him before she ever knew his face, that her loneliness shaped him into existence on canvas. Malik felt a strange mixture of fear and tenderness tightening in his chest. He told her the connection scared him, but losing it scared him more. Sela stepped closer, her voice trembling as she said she didn't want to keep his soul. She wanted to return it. Malik felt the bond pulse one last time, stronger than ever, as if encouraging him to trust her. And for the first time, he did. The night settled heavily around the studio, wrapping everything in a dim, wavering quiet. Malik felt the bond pulling harder now, as if the portrait in his apartment were calling him home. Sela watched him carefully, her breath unsteady, knowing the moment they had avoided for so long had finally arrived. She said the bond couldn't hold both of them without hurting him. Her spirit wasn't meant to cling to anyone. Malik felt torn. Part of him wanted to run from the truth, but another part felt like he'd been walking toward this moment since the day he first saw her painted eyes. Sela said there was only one way to free him. She had to destroy the original portrait, the one carrying her emotions so deeply that it had taken root in him. Malik hesitated, caught between fear and trust, and as Sela reached for her coat, he realized he had no choice but to follow her into whatever truth waited next. The walk to Malik's apartment felt strangely quiet, the city's usual noise fading beneath the slow rhythm of their footsteps. Malik kept his hand against his chest as the familiar heaviness returned in waves, each one sharper the closer they got. Sela walked beside him, her face pale with worry, yet her steps never faltered. She whispered that she had always feared the day she might have to destroy one of her own pieces, especially one made from so much longing. Malik felt a tug deep inside him, as if the portrait sensed his approach and clung to him in desperation. By the time they reached his building, his breath had grown slow and shallow. Sela placed a gentle hand on his arm, telling him they didn't have much time. Malik nodded, knowing the truth. Whatever lived inside that painting had become part of him, and letting go would cost them both something they weren't ready to lose. When Malik unlocked the door, the air inside felt alive, charged, heavy, and strangely warm. The portrait rested exactly where he left it, but something about it had changed. The colors looked richer, the shadows deeper, the eyes brighter, almost human. Malik staggered as another wave of weakness washed over him, forcing Sela to grab his arm. She whispered that the painting was clinging to him, refusing to let go. Malik stepped closer despite his trembling legs, feeling the emotion inside the portrait surge toward him like a tide rushing in. Sela tried to steady herself as she studied it, her voice barely a whisper when she admitted she had never seen one of her works respond like this. Malik could feel something pulling at his chest. Slow, deep, relentless. He knew it wasn't fear holding him still. It was the connection, ancient and intimate, begging him not to break it. Sela stepped between Malik and the painting, her breath shaking as she whispered an apology to him, and to the version of herself trapped on the canvas. Malik watched her hands tremble as she lifted the frame, feeling the connection inside him tug violently, as if something were being peeled away from his heart. The room felt like it shook, though the walls remained still. Sela braced herself, gripping the painting with both hands as though carrying a living weight. Malik tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Sela whispered that she never meant to bind him, that the portrait was born from her own loneliness, not a desire to take anything from him. Malik felt tears blur his vision as he watched her steady herself. She lifted the portrait higher, ready to break it, but Malik could feel the bond pulling harder than ever, begging him to stop her. Sela took one final breath before raising the portrait above her head. Malik felt the pull inside him tighten until it was almost unbearable, like his soul was being stretched between two worlds. Sela whispered his name, not to ask permission but to steady herself. With a sharp cry, she brought the frame down against the floor. The impact echoed through the apartment like a thunderclap. Malik collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest as the bond snapped with a force that stole the air from his lungs. Sela dropped beside him, her hands cupping his face as she begged him to breathe. For a moment, everything blurred. Her voice, the room, even his own heartbeat. Then slowly, the weight in his chest loosened. Sila's tears fell against his skin, and Malik felt something new rising inside him. Not the pull of the portrait, but his own breath returning. The bond was broken, but something between them remained. The apartment felt strangely peaceful after the portrait shattered, as if the air had been holding its breath for too long, and finally exhaled. Malik leaned against the couch, still catching his breath, the heaviness in his chest slowly melting away. Sila sat beside him, her hands trembling, as she tried to process what she had done. The silence between them wasn't tense. It was fragile, like something new and unsteady was trying to form. Malik could feel the absence of the bond as clearly as he once felt its weight. It left him lighter, but also strangely hollow. Sila whispered that she was sorry, not just for the pain he endured, but for the loneliness that had lived inside her long before he entered her life. Malik turned toward her, seeing not an artist who had taken something from him, but a woman who had carried too much of herself in every brushstroke. And in that quiet moment, he realized they finally had the chance to choose each other freely. Malik felt strength returning gradually, as if every breath stitched something back inside him. Sila watched him with a quiet mixture of worry and relief, her fingers twisting lightly in her lap. She admitted that destroying the portrait felt like tearing out a piece of her own heart, yet she would do it again if it meant saving him. Malik reached for her hand, surprised by how steady his touch felt now. He told her he didn't blame her, not anymore. What happened wasn't born from malice, but from a longing neither of them understood. Sila's shoulders softened, the fear in her eyes giving way to vulnerability. She whispered that she didn't know who she was without the weight of her art binding her emotions so tightly. Malik assured her she didn't have to define herself through pain anymore. As she breathed in, her chest rising slowly, Sila realized that for the first time in years, her emotions felt like her own. Hours passed with gentle conversation, the kind that reveals more truth than either of them intended. Malik felt a clarity he hadn't felt in months, as if the fog of heartbreak and confusion he'd carried was finally lifting. Sila listened intently as he spoke about the betrayal that once broke him, the loneliness that followed, the fear of letting anyone close again. She explained how her art became a refuge, how pouring her emotions onto canvas made her feel less alone, even if it meant binding herself to people who didn't exist. Malik understood her pain more than she expected. They were two people who had been shaped by heartache, reaching for something to fill the emptiness. Now, sitting together in the quiet of his apartment, they found a new kind of stillness, one that didn't drain or consume, but simply existed between them. It felt unfamiliar, but safe. By the time the sun began to set again, Malik felt steady enough to stand, and Sila helped him gather the broken pieces of the portrait. It felt symbolic. Two people collecting fragments of something that once held power over them. As they swept the shards into a small box, Sila paused, tracing a finger over one splintered piece of her own painted face. Malik gently took it from her, telling her she didn't need to carry the remnants of her mistakes. She looked up at him with a tenderness that made his chest tighten, not with pain, but with something softer, something hopeful. They threw the last pieces away together, feeling the release settle like a long-awaited breath. The apartment no longer felt haunted or heavy. Instead, it felt like a space waiting to be filled with something new. Malik realized then that breaking free wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of one they could build intentionally without fear. Later, when the apartment was clean and the night had settled quietly around them, Malik and Sila stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker like a constellation of possibilities. Malik felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years, not because everything was perfect, but because he finally understood himself again. Sila leaned gently against him, her voice soft as she admitted she was afraid of hurting him, afraid of losing whatever they were becoming. Malik wrapped an arm around her, telling her they didn't need to rush anything. What mattered was that their connection was theirs now, Not a bond created by longing or painted sorrow, but something chosen in the quiet aftermath of everything that tried to break them. Scylla breathed in deeply, her shoulders easing as she let herself trust the moment. And as they stood together, Malik realized that while the portrait had stolen something from him, Scylla was giving it back in ways far more human.